Did I need the finger gun? I feel like I didn't need the finger gun. How's it going, everyone? Today I wanted to talk about my Shopsmith, how I have it configured for guitar work, as well as some of the modifications and add-ons that I've done to it to extend the functionality. So real quick, I just want to cover what the Shopsmith is. It is a single motor, multi-tool, highly configurable machine that's designed to give you stand-up machinery function in a very small footprint. So Shopsmith has been around for over 70 years. There's been many iterations of this machine. I don't know all the specifics. I'm not an expert on all those differences. I do know basically this model was produced for a very long time, and you can often find them on sale at your local Craigslist for reasonable prices. This machine is a 1 1/8 horsepower, 110 volt motor, and it has a range from 700 RPM to 5,000 RPM. That means it spins just fast enough to do some routing jobs, but it's not ideal for it. There is a new digital head that goes up to 10,000 RPMs and is a 2 horsepower motor when wired to 220. That's definitely a better deal if you can swing it. These things are absolute beasts. This one's over 30 years old, still going strong, and I still use it almost daily for all kinds of things. So in this configuration, it's essentially a drill press. You've got your plunge here. It's got over 4 inches of depth. You've got an adjustable speed here, and on this side there's an adjustable depth stop. What I like about this configuration is that the distance between the bit and these weigh tubes gives me enough room to drill basically anywhere on a guitar body. Sometimes I do have to configure it a little bit so it's not perfect, but in the end I can get anywhere I need to get, and that's a huge plus for me. Let's go ahead and reconfigure this into a router. Loosen this hex key. It's a tight fit, but that's a good thing. And now it's an overhead plunge router. I can turn this on, wrap it up to the maximum speed, and do overhead plunge rounding as needed. I'm going to go ahead and do that now just for demonstration because I can. One thing about using this as a router, because of the way that this is configured, it has a fair bit of control, and the size of the motor and the belt system that runs it gives it a lot of inertia, so it works pretty well as a router. I have, to this point, taking reasonable passes, I have not had it dog out or had other problems with it. However, anyone who's done this kind of routing knows that trying to freehand route is just a really bad idea. So I've got a couple of ways that I can control this route. First, and perhaps most obvious, I have taken the pre-existing fence and I have converted it into an adjustable router fence with extraction that allows me to have a nice firm surface to keep the piece up against, which is a much safer way of doing it. However, for the purposes of plunge routing, this is often not ideal, particularly with guitars, because we tend to work a lot in curves. So I have a different solution for that problem. And that solution is another router. How does this work? Well, put in this pin. Normally I would tighten it all the way down with a wrench, but for now I'll just go hand tight right up in there like that. Now I have a pin router with overhead plunge function, and this is very useful when working with guitar templates for routing out pickup cavities as well as electronic cavities and neck pockets. It's just useful all the way around. However, I don't always use the bottom router with the pin. I can switch these around, say if I need to make a cut with high speed, because the DeWalt router that I have under there is capable of 20,000 RPM. So if I need to do a higher speed cut, I can switch bits around, as well as oftentimes when I'm using the fence, like thusly, I will often use the DeWalt bit in order to make those kinds of cuts. So let me take you underneath real quick and give you a quick shot of what's going on under there that allowed me to mount this to the underside of this table. So this is the setup that we have underneath the table. What we have here is the fixed base for a 6184 DeWalt router. And what I've done is, using 2 bolts and some very specifically drilled holes, I mounted the plate to this metal plate insert that's part of the original table. And that allows me to simply remove the router, and I can use it in my freehand plunge at any time, or I can add it back here and I'm back in business. So the tricky part of putting the pin in here is making sure that it's aligned this way. Best way to do it that I found was to actually have these 1/4-inch pins, and you can just buy 1/4-inch steel rod, in both pieces, and rather than depend on your eyes, depend on your fingers to feel if there's any difference. So if you get them lined up this way so that the base is attached properly, there's no wiggle, and it's where it needs to be, this table actually slides back and forth this way, and you can use that wheel to make minor adjustments to get the alignment correct this way. Bit of a challenge, but ultimately this has been a great tool to have and has been very useful. So now I'd like to move to the other end of the machine and cover the bandsaw real quick. This is also useful to demonstrate the configurability of the machine. So it's really quite simple. I loosen this down here, gently bring this down. Then on this end, there's just a little lever that I push, and that locks this into place. Then that headstock lock, I loosen. Take this guy, put it in here. What this is a PVC transmission. It allows that if something jams on this end, this PVC breaks and the machine stops because the power is disconnected from the motor. So that's kind of a nice safety feature. Then just slide that over here, lock it down, make sure I'm on low speed, and now it's a bandsaw. As a bandsaw, it's useful, it's pretty powerful, but it is also limited. This is, it's not a commercial unit, but it is good for scroll type work. There's a definite limit on your throat here, as well as the height. You've only got a little less than 6 inches of clearance here, which is probably the most wood you should be putting through this machine anyway. But it's definitely served me very well. Cut quite a bit on this thing, and you can work around the limited throat by working more to the outside edge. I also just cut a hole in this and bolted one of the 4-inch hose adapters, because that allows me to have active dust collection while I'm working, which is great because without it, you end up with a lot of sawdust on the floor. So very useful to have. That's about it for the bandsaw. I currently am using 1/4 Timberwolf blade, and I pretty much only use it for scroll type of work. That's where it shines best, I think. All right, so let's go ahead and reconfigure the machine to use the drum sander. Obviously, this is something that I built myself. I designed it very closely off the plans from Highline Guitars because it has a unique and very effective mechanism for raising and lowering the table, which I'll show you in a minute. In terms of the Shopsmith, this is a very useful setup because, again, it's a relatively small footprint. I was able to build this machine for much cheaper, run it using an existing motor that has variable speed control. So, in order to do this, I'm going to loosen the headstock, move that out of the way. By the way, normally this slides easier along the way tubes. I need to re-wax them. It's been a while. For all the Shopsmith aficionados out there, I'm not going to tell you how long. Take this off. I usually just set it over here on the bandsaw because that's where I will need it next. Put on a pulley, lock it down, lock the headstock back down. Go ahead and grab the belt and we'll just hook it around. We pop that in there. All good. Pull this back as tight as I can. And then because of the angle that this is cut, I can just push down, get a fair bit of tension there, lock it down, and that's it. It's ready to go. I put this back on the top, and then I can turn on the machine. Machine actually running. To me, the drum sander is a very simple machine. and it really didn't make sense to pay the kind of prices you have to pay to get an 18-inch wide. Certainly at the time, but even now, I don't know that I'd be comfortable paying that much for a drum sander. This is the mechanism for raising and lowering the table. As you can see, the action is really smooth. It allows for tiny adjustments. It's got a little sponginess, but that's due to an error in construction that I'll point out. It definitely didn't have to. So this is the mechanism that we're looking at. You've got hinges up here, reversed hinges down here. You've got a 2x4 as well as a threaded insert there. And then as you turn, that board slowly moves. And it makes a terrible sound. And that gives you your raising and lowering action. Now, my thought was that the hinges should be directly underneath the drum. However, in retrospect, understanding that that end over there is hinged to the end piece there, I realized that these hinges would probably be better located further towards this end, and it would probably reduce some of that sponginess. That's my theory anyway. One of these days I'll get around to doing it, probably. And I have dust collection on top. Again, same hose. Works for all the others. Now the one thing that commercial drum sanders have that I do not is some sort of conveyor belt system. So I do have to push the pieces through by hand. And that does require patience and stability to push them through at an even rate to get a good even sand on each piece. However, it is very doable. The final piece of how I use this machine is the buffer. But essentially, the buffer hooks to the machine in a very similar way to the drum stand. Release tension on the belt here, unhook it. I need this moved and unhook. Good tension, and then simply turn it on. So the buffer itself is in fact actually designed off of Chris at Highline's guitar design for a buffer. I copied his undermount, which makes sense in terms of where the workpiece is going to be and getting as much clearance as possible. Obviously, I have it adapted to the Shopsmith for that specific use. What I'm using here is actually a golf cart axle, and the usefulness of this axle is it comes with threaded ends. The span was about right for what I wanted, so I built the machine around using this axle. So down here you can see I've got pillow blocks on either end, rather stout ones. The axle goes through there, and there's a pulley here that the belt attaches to. In between the buffer wheel and the pillow block, I have these pieces of PVC I cut, which allows me, when I tighten it, to tighten it against the rotating part of the pillow block there. The nut on the end is a nylon nut that came with the axle, so I've been using that. Eventually I figure I'll probably have to replace it, but for now it works. There is enough room on this for 2, and you could probably even fit 3 wheels on here if you wanted to. Personally, I think 2 is fine for the fine side, and then for the extra fine, I find I actually prefer a single wheel. It allows me to be a little more precise. This particular wheel is used for polishing frets. There is no faster way to polish frets. I can do an entire fretboard in a couple of minutes tops. I cannot see myself going back to polishing frets one at a time. And I recommend anyone who has access to a buffing machine give this a try. I think it's definitely worth it. In a nutshell, that is the buffing machine. Pretty simple, really. That is a tour of my Shopsmith, how I've got it configured for guitar work. I hope it was interesting. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them down below. I definitely read each one, and I usually answer every single one. I do want to give a special shout out to my Aunt Sharon, who gave me this machine, and without that I would not have been able to do or get as far as I've gotten on the woodworking and guitar building and lutherie path. I genuinely appreciate that. This has been an absolutely amazing machine for me, and I've been able to do a ton with it. Other than that, hit like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video.